All right, everybody, we're going to start off with something free this morning. How about that? Good morning. I'm Don Pascal, co-chair of the Parents Fund. I'm with Amy Gorman, who's director of the Parents Fund, and we really are giving something away. I checked my Google this morning, and the Powerball is up to $60 million. But we're giving away something that's priceless, much more useful than that. So we're going to have a drawing momentarily, and two families of seniors are going to win front row seats to graduation. Those are hard to come by, and you only had to do one thing to be eligible for this drawing, and that is get your Parents Fund gift in by 12/31. So if you're not a senior parent, pay attention to that next year. So we're going to draw two names, and we have certificates here. I'm going to draw them, and Amy's going to read them out. Got to go to the bottom.
Stephen and Michelle Paduano. Yay. James and Barbara Totkus.
Thanks, Amy. I was also a little shameless with the merchandise this morning. I bought this tie at the crew desk, and it's got every sport on it. There's limited quantities left, so go grab one, and supporting the junior class. So I hope everyone had fun out there at what I hear is called the Bazaar, not just the Bazaar. All right. So I mentioned before, I'm Don Pascal, together with my wife Maris. We're co-chairs of the Parents Fund, and we give you all a warm welcome this morning. Schools have semesters and Super Bowls have halftimes. So now it's time to report on our 2013 Taft Parents Fund, just a bit past our own halftime. We don't have a Super Bowl halftime show to offer. Beyonce would have broken the bank, and I have the worst singing voice in Connecticut. But we do have an awfully good halftime score for all of you. Let's get going here. So before showing you a few numbers, I have a deal for you. I'm making the speech much shorter, and I'm counting on the message sinking in much deeper. Let's focus on this photo. Everyone knows the value of teamwork, and nothing captures that concept better than a crew boat in sync. As a community working on the Parents Fund, we need 100% of us to pull on the oars called Taft participation. And we need everyone to set their charitable priorities with their children in mind and to pull on the oar called Taft giving. So if we all pull on the giving and participation oars with energy and commitment, our kids and the Taft mission will have a very successful Parents Fund. So let's go to the scoreboard and see the results thus far. Taft parents are off to a great start on this chart showing our total giving by month for the past 3 Parents Funds. The yellow bars show our 2013 progress, blue bars show 2012, and the red bars show 2011. In 2013, parents' gifts on the tallest yellow bar are now, as of today, just over $1.3 million, and running at a pace that is ahead of both prior years. But as you can see, we have to keep pushing forward to those higher June bars to meet Taft's needs. The next set of bars shows our progress on participation. Surprisingly, our 2013 participation rate in yellow of 43% at the end of January and 48% as of today is behind each of the past 2 years. I'm not worried at the moment because Taft parents traditionally trounce our competition in the participation category. But the slow pace so far is a major call to action for those who have not yet given. The ahead of pace dollars and behind pace participation actually tells us something quite important. Those who have given thus far really did think hard about their giving priorities, and they moved their children up their list of those giving priorities. And to those who have already given, we offer you a rhino-sized thank you. You are making a big difference. Thank you. That brings up our next photo, and it's not just about soccer. It's about a perfect pass to a teammate. And that's what we need to do right here, right now. The parents who have given already are passing the ball to those parents who have not yet given. One set of parents has given the Parents Fund a lead, and now it's time for the other set of parents to go win the game for Taft. So please take that call from a Parents Committee volunteer and try to give your gift before the main June crunch. This auditorium address is my last one as part of Maris and my 2-year term as co-chairs. We have to say that the most rewarding part of this job is seeing this really special Taft community respond to our children and the mission of the school. So thanks so much for your passion for Taft. Finally, we ask for your commitment through June 30th to set an all-time participation record for the Taft Parents Fund. The slide says 100%, and we ask, why not? Thank you, and now here is our fellow parent and headmaster, Willie McMullen.
I can't tell you how grateful I am to Don and Maris for the way they've served Taft. They've served and led in a way that I think is marked by just incredible generosity and grace. And you guys are welcome to stick around for a few more years. Okay, I'm going to miss you. Thank you so much for what you've done. And I don't need to talk about it at any length, but you guys are the lifeblood of the school. That annual fund is what lets us close the gap between the costs of the school and what we get in tuition. So it's vital. I'm deeply appreciative that you've done it. And I want to talk about a topic today I've been thinking about for some time. And I want to mention something about campus safety, which is something probably a lot of you have thought about. But then I want to actually pose a different question, and I want to talk about what schools used to be and what I think they need to be. And I think I want to suggest that schools are at a pivotal moment in their history, and we need to think very carefully about how brave we want to be in terms of how we want to engage the outside world. Now, within days of the Sandy Hook shooting, that terrible tragedy, every school in the country wondered what it meant to be safe. You all, I'm sure, did as well. The winter edition of the Independent Schools magazine, which is a terrific publication from the National Association, it led with an article on safety. The Connecticut Association of Independent Schools sponsored a major workshop, and about 30 schools went, including Taft. Emergency plans were reviewed on every campus. And every school, I think, asked this question. They asked, how do we keep the outside world from entering through our gates? And it's actually a really fascinating question. The reaction was understandable. It was appropriate. The question of campus safety is a critical one, of course. Now, and even putting aside the fact that campuses like ours are statistically incredibly safe places, every single school felt that it had to examine its protocols and practices. We were no different. My senior team had been working on updating our crisis plan for the past year and a half or so, and so we accelerated the efforts. Our head of campus safety is a man who had about 10 years working with the state police. He was on the state task force on Homeland Security after 9/11, so he brings enormous experience. Our CFO was someone who had been working in the college world before. And so I tasked them and others in my leadership team to look at our protocols. And we brought Watertown Police and Fire on campus. We had them review our plans. We did a site tour. We exchanged blueprints. We tested our various notification systems out. We brought in outside experts. We engaged a vendor to help us design emergency flip charts that would be placed all over campus. And next week, actually, we're going to be hosting a program with about 30 different schools from Connecticut and Massachusetts and New York to look at issues of campus safety, and then we have brought in some industry experts and outside sources. We had incidents like a gas leak during the summer. We had a high wind watch one point this fall. We had Storm Sandy. All of those gave us opportunities to practice the ways in which we notify and deal with emergencies, and we committed ourselves to even more exercises. This work never ends, by the way. We will be asking this question about how do we make sure we're a safe school all the time. But I'll tell you, we also pushed back on some recommendations from sources that I don't believe fundamentally understand a school like ours. We noted, for instance, and I did this with a consultant, that there is a profound difference between a school and a campus, right? Ours, a village of some 200 acres and many buildings and countless entrances. We are a campus. And like a lot of schools, we also noted that you cannot do the work of our mission if we give up the fundamental trust and openness that you know well. We cannot be the school we need to be, where we are a place where the visiting parent or the family in admissions or the Taft student can walk into the main building, where boys and girls race out of their unlocked dormitories late for class, where kids wake up on a morning perhaps and go for a jog on the quiet streets, where friends and families from town come in to walk their dogs on a Sunday or to bring sleds to go sledding on the hill. That's the kind of community we have to be, and I think that to lose that would be terrible. The question of how gated a community a school should be is an interesting one, but I think it has to be about something much more profound. It has to be more than about safety. I would argue there's actually a very interesting and complete and different topic, almost an existential one, if you will. And it's one that boarding schools need to examine, and it's this: how openly engaged with the external world do these schools want to be? In other words, how do we, as primarily rural schools, founded on the idea that we were literally and figuratively isolated, to what extent do we want to open our gates to the trends, the disruptions, and the challenges of the outside world? And as you'd guess, knowing me, my answer is, I think we should open them a lot. Now, to understand the question, you need to know something about, and we all should know, how boarding schools were created in the first place. And many of the great American boarding schools, the New England boarding schools in particular, were founded in a tiny window of time, from about 1880 to 1910. And if we understand why they appeared when they did, and why they appeared so suddenly, we can understand something about how we are equipped as schools today. So what happened in those 3 decades, 1880 to 1910? There's a longer answer that has to do with the demise of what were called the rural academies, these small academies that were dotted New England. Another answer is that the new public school movement, this is the time when public schools really began to become a fixture in America, had great struggles. But here's the simple answer. Boarding schools emerged in the late 19th century because they wanted to get students away from their parents and out of the cities. That's the simple answer. In this way of thinking, in the Gilded Age of growing affluence, parents were seen as often by educators as often too indulgent, and cities were seen as immoral. This was a time of massive immigration, and cities were changing the face of the landscape. And I thought to myself, the idea that a school's success is founded, at least to some extent, on the idea that we need to get children away from their parents in cities is kind of an odd idea. I mean, why would that be critical to the success of our schools? But that's exactly where those schools began in 1880 to 1910. And it's not a new idea. This characterized European thinking, and particularly British thinking, many years back. To give you an example, I attended a British boarding school for a year when I was 14 years old. The school was founded in, and get this, 1480. There are other schools like it. Eton, the famous school Eton, was founded actually 40 years later. There's another school, Harrow, a well-known school. It was the newcomer on the block. It was started in 1579. And I would say the school I went to had not changed much in the ensuing 500 years. We all joked about the food still being the same. And like the colleges that it mimicked, and of course, the New England boarding schools were mimicking the British college systems. And you've seen this, of course, in Ivy League universities in particular. Architecturally and theoretically, they were trying to replicate those. And that school I went to even mimicked those colleges in terms of the way it appeared. The architecture said something about the school's stance on the world. There were these sturdy stone facades facing out. You entered the school through gates, and there was a quad that felt very protected. It may sound a little bit like a school you know. Now, in this country, the claim that the city was an enemy to education was heard by reformers as early as the 1820s, and then very loudly in the 1840s and 1850s. And you're smart enough as historians to know why. It's partly because the words city and Catholic immigrant really meant the same thing. The movement was founded primarily on the idea that the cities had changed in terms of an immigrant population. At one conference, listen to this educational conference that came, I think this is in the mid-1840s. The speaker spoke about the need for new schools and wrote, "We need a new institution under our own control from which we can exclude all doctrines we deem dangerous." Listen to the voice of contemporary reformers, educators, and clergy. Here they speak about the urban schools and the urban environment. One man wrote, "The urban school was, quote, a den of intemperance and gaming, the air foul with tobacco and liquors." And we thought we had it hard here. Another wrote of the cities, "There is a new class of juvenile delinquents, which is piratical, adventurous, unprincipled boys and girls." And my favorite, this came from a clergyman in Boston, "See the, quote, mere boys swagger up to the bar, toss off their glasses with such indifference, and swear and smoke and gamble. Can it be wondered that if the boys are allowed to spend their evenings and Sabbath away from home, that they should be corrupted?" So there was a sense, and it was strongly felt, that society was somehow losing control, and new schools sprang up, if you will, into that void. They were there to provide a sanctuary from all that the city represented: affluence, vice, and moral decay. Then came the final 2 decades on either side of this century, and that smoldering concern about cities and immigration completely blew up. And it's against this very complicated social dynamic that schools like Taft were founded. Remember, it is hard to overstate the antipathy for and the fear of the city for many Victorians. It's not, frankly, the most attractive of our historical chapters. I think racism and xenophobia are the commonly used, if occasionally disguised, threads in the argument. All of those foreigners, all those accents, those religions, the traditions, the dress. To many, it was unsettling, and to some, it was terrifying. The American city was being transformed, and with an incredible rapidity. Take this statistic that I stumbled on. In 1890, the number of foreign-born in Chicago outnumbered the entire population of Chicago only 10 years before. Many Americans viewed the city and the teeming population of immigrants from Italy and from Poland and Russia and a score of countries as corrosive to social and moral and political and religious order. And so here's where the boarding schools came in. They met the social and educational needs of a largely upper-class white and Christian market, such that families could get their children safely away from the city. A survey of boarding schools at the time noted very bluntly this: in certain localities, the companions of the boy in all but the higher grades of day school are, from their nationality, objectionable personable habits, and whatnot, undesirable. You've got that whatnot, right? It's everything. Cannot be more blunt. This was a survey done of schools at the time. If you go to the literature, the founding literature of Groton, which was founded in 1884, it explicitly states that the reason for creating the school was the, quote, rapid growth of the cities. And historian Arthur Powell, who's an educational historian, writes, "The idea of a school as nurturing and protective haven proved appealing when affluence and urban immigration were both growing." So again, you find those two rationales. In the Gilded Age of affluence and a time of immigration, a different school was called for. And there is, by the way, a fascinating graph I found, which graphs out the annual number of immigrants in the nation by year and the dates of the founding of private boarding schools. And the story couldn't be clearer. It's as if there are two mountain ranges, identical in peaks and valleys, with the school founding simply pushed a year or two to the right. That is, at peaks of immigration, you saw peaks of school foundings. It's fascinating. The correlation could not be more clear. Listen to this partial list, just a partial list of schools that were founded from 1880 to 1910. Lawrenceville, Groton, Woodbury Forest, Taft, Hotchkiss, Choate, St. Mark's, St. George's, Middlesex, Salisbury, Trinity Pauling, Kent, Westover, Westminster. All of those schools in that 30-year period. There is no era in our history, I think, that has provided a similar flowering of schools, and nothing united these disparate institutions more than their explicit effort to protect themselves, to isolate themselves from the social and demographic trends of the time. And it is critical that we understand this legacy because we live it. Their locations were invariably rural. They saw themselves as functioning in the place of parents, and their stance on most things contemporary was isolationist. They were built, I think, on equal parts fear and hope. They were separatists. And the history of this school is typical. Horace Taft, as you know, I've mentioned it many times, founded the school in 1890 in a small house in Pelham Manor. But the decision to move it from Pelham was, and here's his quote, "We were altogether too near New York." I know you'd like that changed. He wanted to get away from the city and all it represented, and I guess indulgent parents like you and me. He enjoyed the joke, by the way, you've heard, parents are the last people on earth who should have children. He wanted to move away. He knew what he wanted. He wanted a place apart. If urban America was the problem, the solution was the boarding school. He wrote, "Think of the task of the public school teacher. Such a teacher has before him or her a large heterogeneous group, many of the pupils having no home influence, their real training coming from the streets. The teacher sees students only in the school hours. What chance is there for moral influence What chance is there for moral influence? We need to have a school where students will live on campus, where we will develop character." So he separated actively, strategically. His search for a new location took him to Litchfield, obviously a rural town, to nearby New Milford, which of course is where Canterbury would end up being founded, to rural New Jersey. And when told by a friend in 1892 of a possible location, he replied to a question many of you have asked, "Where in the world is Watertown, Connecticut?" And in a way, I think, the spot passed a very important test for him, didn't it? It was isolated. It was cut off. It was estranged. Within a few years, he had built the fence, put up the brick pillars, and hung the gate. So Taft began as a sanctuary, founded like so many schools on a dream of sequestered innocence. Like other schools of its ilk, its identity rested on the explicit, rigorous rejection of social, educational, and demographic realities. And that belief would remain in varying forms at the heart of the American boarding school philosophy. But there's a paradox here, and you've seen it. You actually saw it today, even in classes. For this school, founded like all the others in the same era, was actually powerless in preventing the forces and trends from intruding onto campus life. And indeed, in some ways, it was profoundly interested in engaging in them. And so the tension, I think, has marked our schools forever. The gate swings open and shut, and open and shut. Think of the reflection that Taft had at one point in 1942 when he was retired and living about a half a mile from campus. He was asked about what changes he had seen in the boys in the years. And he spoke of social trends and how invariably they came onto campus despite his efforts and how they became part of school life. And he said, boys of today, of course it was still all boys then, boys of today are made of the same stuff, good, bad, and indifferent. The only trouble is they need today to be a great deal better. The movies, the radio, the automobile make it so difficult for boys to lead the simple life and to avoid the undue dissipation of their thoughts and energies. And I think, how quaint does that sound today, right? Oh my God, the radio is such a distraction. In 1996, Arthur Powell, that historian I mentioned, would write in the introduction of his book, he wrote a great book called The American Prep School, and he wrote of the same challenge of how even then, some 50 years later, he observed the ways in which schools had to confront the world of the modern media. So again, think back to 1996 here. The great competition schools face is simply to hold students' attention. The educational impact of the youth consumption industry, and especially of the youth-oriented media, is enormous and growing. The movie, music, video complex is anti-read, anti-write, anti-think, and anti-talk. He was talking about MTV. It sounds like ancient history. But he's probing the same idea. To what extent do these schools open its gates to the things like media? So the history of private schools then and boarding schools like ours is really a history of how much we allow the outside world to enter the gates. In truth, Taft was never able to completely isolate itself. We may have planted a hedge, but we never walled the garden. All manner of outside forces and trends have come onto this campus. Wars, politics, social policy, Supreme Court decisions, influenzas, current events, intellectual movements, developments in science, changes in media, technological advances, new ideas in teaching theory. Like our peers, we have seesawed back and forth, on one hand, seeking the historical isolation that was our birthing, and on the other, drawing the world outside through the brick pillars. And so it brings us back to today, and a challenge I think we all have. If I have a concern, it's that there is a possibility, I think there's a chance, that our fear about the dangers of the world might lead us to build taller, real, and figurative gates, that we might retreat to that defensive stance that marked the early years of all these schools, that we might view the world through an isolationist lens, and that we might install padlocks to keep out the very forces that can connect and free us. And I think this would be a grave mistake. It's true that the anxiety that led to the creation of these schools left to a useful legacy of distance and independence, a kind of healthy degree of pushing back on those forces. You don't see students talking on cell phones in the main hall. But I think that defensiveness has to be very carefully checked. And we cannot be the same school we were in 1890 or even 1990. I think the world today requires schools to be fully engaged if we're to prepare our students for the challenges they face. We absolutely need to make sure our schools are as safe as they can be. But to the broader existential question, we need to realize that it's impossible, it's impractical, and it's unwise to decline the engagement with the forces that are shaping the future, no matter how complex they are. I think it's about a mindset that schools need to have. I think schools need to be fundamentally optimistic, confidently outward-looking, intentionally expansive, and maybe even courageous. I mean this. We have to understand and embrace and extend the ways in which technology has changed how we communicate, learn, and share information, and maybe even make sense of human existence. I think we need to commit to diversity in all forms in our community, because that's where students will get rehearsal in working with and solving problems and collaborating with people with very different perspectives. We need to reach out, I believe, and partner strategically with external communities in a way that strengthens both and in a way that reminds us that our private schools must have a public purpose. I think we need to teach both the perils and promise of digital citizenship, for it's here, and this is a generation which, for the first time in history, will find that their virtual identities and networks are going to be as important as their real ones. And I think we need to make the challenges of global leadership on a flattened and fragile and interconnected planet part of the formal and informal curricula. In short, I'm arguing we need to be fully engaged. Tony Wagner argues in a book some of you may know called The Global Achievement Gap, which is a fascinating book. He's a Harvard professor, and he's thought a lot about what achievement will require moving forward. He says that in almost every CEO he interviews, you hear the same thing on what's required in terms of today's workplace. And he says this: everybody says the ability to ask good questions and network teams of diverse viewpoints is vital. Every CEO speaks of the interest in working fluidly across boundaries of time and space, nationality, and politics. And every CEO talks about the habit of adaptability and flexibility in a world almost unfathomably dynamic. You will not develop these skills in a school that refuses to acknowledge and to engage in the world outside its gates. Horace Taft wasn't talking like this, but I am, and if I were not, you should be asking for your money back. I think the school that is fundamentally isolationist may be physically and intellectually safe, but it will graduate ill-equipped students, and in time, it will wither into irrelevancy. The fact is, our children will enter a world that is not the one that you and I knew. And for our students, I would argue we've got to keep the gate open and more than just a little bit cracked. And we're going to need to be very brave schools. And it's with the hope that you saw a little bit of that school and the mission we have and the faculty who lead it that I greet you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you.